Our next talk is on studying in Japan, and due to the popularity of this particular topic, this is the second session dedicated to studying in Japan. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our very generous speaker, Helen Kenyon, who's kindly agreed to come back and share her experiences and insights into studying in Japan. So Helen is a freelance Japanese-English translator and interpreter, and has around 7 years' experience of living, studying, and working in Japan. So I think that's enough for me, so please, Helen. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. Just to quickly say before I start, this is exactly the same talk as the one I gave at the beginning of this event. So if anybody's already seen it, then I advise you use the time in the booth area or something. Good? No? Okay. So hopefully this is new to everyone. My name's Helen. I lived for about 7 years in Japan. I began learning Japanese after I finished high school. Took the kind of maybe crazy, maybe I like to think of it as ambitious choice to go and study Japanese studies at Cambridge with absolutely no knowledge of Japanese whatsoever before I started the course. Well, like a little bit, but and during that time I studied for a while in Osaka. I also did a year in Kyoto as an intern, and after I graduated, I went on the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, the JET program, for about 2 years. I did that in the very north of Honshu, the main Japanese island, for 2 years, and then I spent around 4 years in Tokyo, during which time I worked for Keio University, who are one of the hosts of this event. I'm going to, in 20 minutes, I'm going to try and squeeze in a real sort of general overview just to cover some really basic topics that you might want to think about when you're deciding if you want to study in Japan, what you want to study, and where you want to study. So I'll just sort of bring up some programs that are available and then go through some general information about what it's like to study in Japan, what's the social life like, and then some things about tuition fees. Hopefully after the talk you'll have plenty of time to go and talk to the university representatives, because I won't take any questions because there's not much time. But you can also ask questions in the next session where students who have experience of studying in Japan will talk about their personal experiences, and you can ask them questions during that or maybe at the booth later. So I'll just get cracking on what kind of thing you might want to study in Japan. If you're really new to the idea of studying in Japan and you haven't studied much Japanese yet and you want to get an idea of what the culture is like, a really great option is to go for a short-term program. They're about 2 to 6 weeks long, and they'll give you a general introduction to Japanese culture and a little bit of Japanese language as well. There's various levels, so if you do have already some Japanese ability, you can also maybe study at intermediate and higher level. As there's a range of topics up there that they cover. And there are also specific, subject-specific programs sometimes, like there's a course in Japanese law or contemporary culture. And those programs are, most of the universities that are here today offer a short-term program like that. So you can get information from the universities here today, or simply Googling short-term programs Japan, you'll get a lot of results there. The programs, they're offered in kind of March, springtime or wintertime, and also there's a lot of programs that you can do in summer, so you could fit that in your university holidays as well if you're already an undergraduate student here in the UK. And actually there are a few of those programs where you have to already be an undergraduate, so just also keep an eye out for what kind of requirements there are for the programs. The Keio, where I worked, does a program, one of these programs. It's really, it's also combines as well as learning the culture in class, you get to go out and learn the culture hands-on. So for example, they'll teach you something about Japanese management, and then you go out to a Japanese company and do some kind of hands-on field work. So it's a really good opportunity to get a good broad overview. And a few of the students that I spoke to said they were using it as a kind of a stepping stone to get an idea of whether they wanted to go out and do a longer study abroad. So that's something to think about if you're just kind of starting to think about your options. But if you're already considering something a bit more long-term, maybe doing an undergraduate degree or postgraduate degree in Japan, the first thing is that the kind of levels are pretty much the same as the UK, bachelor's, master, and PhD, except that whereas in the UK the programs tend to be about 3 years long, in Japan all bachelor's degrees will take 4 years. And then for graduate programs, it's 2 years for masters, and then an extra 3 to take you up to PhD level. Another big difference is that the academic year in Japan starts in April as opposed to in autumn like here. So that's something to keep in mind if you're thinking about going straight out of school into a Japanese university. But there are a lot of courses that also have a start in autumn. So just kind of keep an eye out for what kind of options are available. A lot of universities have programs like that because they're very keen for international students to be able to fit smoothly into the Japanese university system. So don't get despondent if you see that the academic year is starting in April. There are lots of courses that you can start in autumn. And also, if you don't have such a high level of Japanese, there are lots of options open to study an entire degree, undergraduate and postgraduate degrees that are taught completely in English. So, and they're actually in a range of subjects, not just the humanities. There's also so there's kind of subjects like in politics, international studies, that kind of thing, but also science and technology, and some kind of new subjects like some really good programs in information technology, media design, postgraduate level as well. So that's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about what kind of programs you might want to study. Another thing is it's also good to kind of think about how the content of the programs, because there is a difference that in Japan as opposed to the UK, where a lot of degrees are very specialized on just your subject. In Japan, they're influenced by the American system, so there's often general education requirements. So in the first 2 years, you study some core options in your subject, but you also study some. You might also have to take some options that are completely different. So, for example, if you're studying something like engineering or a science subject, you might also have to study something. You have the opportunity to study something like history or philosophy. The Japanese students, they will take a second language. So it gives you a kind of broader base of getting into sort of academic study at university level before you specialize. And most Japanese students will specialize in their field in their final 2 years of the degree. And the way that the sort of teaching format in Japan is really quite similar to the UK, I think. They have large lectures, but also small class group teaching, a bit like tutorials. Particularly in the final 2 years of a degree, most students join something called a seminar class, which is called, in Japanese, it's called a zemi. And the zemi is about sort of 10 to 15 students in a group, and they're led by a professor who then gets them to do really intensive research together. So there's sort of, they get a lot of opportunities to debate and work together doing sort of collaborative research, which is also a good opportunity. So something you might want to look out for if that's kind of available on the program that you're interested in. And the way that students actually manage to graduate with their degrees is that they have to collect credits. I think a lot of I'm maybe a bit too old to know what it's like in the UK university system, but I think a lot of UK universities have credit systems now, right? So it's possibly quite similar to the UK system. Students collect credits by taking exams, doing coursework. Also, you get credits for attending classes. And a lot of students try to get their credits, the credits that they need for graduation in the first few years of their degree, because in Japan, there's the job hunting culture the job hunting can take a very long time, because a lot of students, a lot of large Japanese companies hire students directly after graduation. So students will graduate in March and go straight into a company in April. And so in their final year, they're taking, there's a lot of work to do applying for companies and taking interviews. So the students like to make sure that they have plenty of time in their final year to do that. See, I haven't lost my way. So then, once you are sort of settled on the idea of what you're going to study, obviously a really big element is thinking about what kind of living arrangements there are. In Japan, there's a lot of student accommodation provided by universities for international students. Most universities try to make sure that there's enough accommodation for international students to live in university accommodation for at least their first year in Japan. So they'll offer dormitories with fully furnished rooms at pretty reasonable prices. And it's also a really good environment to live in because there's a mixture of dormitories which are completely a mixture of Japanese and international students, and sometimes dormitories which are almost entirely international students, but they'll always try to have, and I'm not sure if that's true for all universities, but at Keio they have a system where they have student resident assistants who will live in the dormitory with you and make sure that you have help with things like when you initially arrive in Japan, you need to go and register at the town hall, that kind of thing. So they'll help you out with that kind of stuff and also arrange social events so that you've got a nice, that you can just settle into Japanese life a bit easier. Of course, you also have the option to rent your own apartment, but then it's really important to refer to the services that are offered by the university. They'll always try to offer a service to introduce apartments to you because in Japan it can be a little bit complex renting an apartment. For example, you need to have a guarantor who'll sign the contract with you. And often the university will do that for you, will act as your guarantor. There's also sort of the initial costs of moving into an apartment in Japan can be a little bit pricey because you need to pay something called key money, which is a non-returnable deposit. It's basically a present for your landlord, and and then you also have to pay a few months' rent in advance, that kind of thing. So it's really good to use the university's services there to make sure that you don't get into difficulty with that. And they can also introduce some other good options, things like I lived in 2 share houses when I was in Japan. They were really great. I don't think they're quite so common as possibly in the UK, but in Japan. And particularly there's quite a few share houses that are completely foreigners. So if you can, try and look out for somewhere that's a mixture of Japanese people and international students or people who are living in Japan to work. Because those share houses have a really great social atmosphere, and the Japanese people who live there, the people that I lived with, were really keen to sort of get to know people from abroad and to help you out as well, to make sure that you're settled in and just help out with all kinds of things in daily life. And another really great option is thinking about doing a homestay. Even if you just think about doing that for short term, just when you first arrive, just to get used to what it's like daily living in Japan. And I found that living with a Japanese family was really great because I did my homestay in Osaka, and in Osaka the people are sort of famous for being very direct, and at the time I was still very bad at Japanese, and my host mother just constantly said, you know, your Japanese is so awful, so awful. And somehow I managed to motivate me to improve my Japanese. And they've just been such a great support to me throughout my entire time in Japan. I still have a very good relationship with them. So getting to know doing a homestay and getting to know your host family can also be a really great experience. And once you're settled in with where you're going to live, another thing to think about is what kind of social activities there are at the university or university. In Japan, Japanese students they invest a lot of time in club activities. Most universities will have hundreds of student activities, clubs that you can join. You might want to try something a bit traditional. I had a go at Japanese martial arts. I did kendo and had some really pretty awful, went with I don't want to say sword fighting, but yeah, I ended up with awful muscle ache all the time with that. Kudo as well I did was really great. Japanese archery. You might want to try some kind of traditional arts or something like that. And the sporting tradition in Japanese universities is also really strong. I had a really great time with when I was an intern at Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto. I joined the rowing club for a bit, and I really enjoyed just not so much the actual sport training part, but the night before we would all go and stay at the rowing facility and just have a really great time socializing. So that's joining a club is a really great part of university life in Japan. And another thing is that a lot of Japanese students will spend a lot of time doing a part-time job, and that's something else that as an international student you can do. You just need to make sure that you have the permission from the immigration. I think you need to make sure that you that's okay with your visa, and I think there's probably a limit to how much you can do. I'm going to have to done it again. I'm going to have to whiz through the money side of it. So tuition fees. There are three types of Japanese university. About 80% of Japanese universities are private, and the rest of universities they're essentially non-private universities. So national universities are funded by the national government, and public universities are organized by the local government in the prefecture, which is kind of the equivalent of our counties in England, but considerably bigger in area. As you can see, there's kind of about £2,000 difference. These are just averages for the private tuition fees, but about £2,000 difference for the private university tuition fees. But in general, the average is about £5,000 or less. So I won't read out the comparison with the UK university fees, but I think that speaks for itself. But and then in terms of living costs, this is just a student survey saying that the national average is about £500 a month. That's for everything apart from your tuition fees, so accommodation, food, all that kind of thing. Just the thing to note is that as the map is that also includes tuition fees, but what it shows is that there is a relatively considerable difference between Tokyo, that's Kanto is where Tokyo is. That's about £200 a month more living costs than somewhere in the North Japan in Tohoku. And also it's a little bit more expensive in the Kinki area, that's where Kyoto and Osaka is. But I'd also just say here quickly, even though I've run out of time, sorry, that you might have the impression that Japan is a very expensive place to live, but actually it is possible to get by on a fairly reasonable budget. For example, I'd say like eating out in Japan can be very reasonable. You can eat very healthily, like Japanese student canteens, or even in central Tokyo, there are restaurants where you can eat for fairly reasonably. So that's just a general guide to living costs. And I'm going to whiz really quickly through scholarships and funding. There are loads of opportunities available for scholarships and funding, particularly for international students, because Japanese universities are really keen right now to encourage more international students to come to Japan to study. So look out for the MEXT is the Japanese Ministry of Education. They have a good program for undergraduates. It's only for Japanese studies, people who are studying Japanese studies. But for postgraduate, you can get good funding for any area. And that's something you can get more information from the Japanese embassy today. There are also really great programs from the individual universities, which would be, they're very comprehensive. They'll include everything, your travel fee, costs and a living stipend and tuition fees. So again, something, look out for university scholarships, and there are also scholarships from private organizations. Again, the Japanese Embassy, the Daira Foundation, the Japan Foundation, they all have booths here today, so you can ask about scholarship opportunities if you're interested. And finally, I just say that I think maybe once you've sort of thought about everything what you want to study, and everything I've talked about now, you might be left with the decision of where you're going to go in Japan. And on that, I'd say that I spent 7 years in Japan, and during that time, I lived in and visited various places. In Osaka, I met amazing, warm, friendly people. It's a crazy, lively city. In Kyoto, I really enjoyed the traditional culture. There's just so much of Japan's history there. In Aomori, I really enjoyed the nature. The people were really friendly. I learned a completely new language in the north of Japan, the Japanese dialect is incredibly strong. And I really enjoyed the just amazing powder skiing every night in night skiing there, because I get the temperature up there is very cold, there's great snow. And then down in Tokyo, that's a completely different story altogether. It's a massive, massive city with so much to do. So because there are so many different options available in Japan, when you're making your final decision about where to go, just take the time to sort of find out more about the culture, about the area that your university is in, and just when you decide about where you'd like to study in Japan. That's all from me. I hope you take the time to go and sort of talk to the universities about your specific questions, and there's also the alumni session now, and you can grab me if you have any questions about living in Japan. Thank you.